and also your evolution over time. Like you evolved. 5 years later, you're a different person. You've accumulated views. Stuff has happened to you. Your plans have all changed. And so to be have the difference is also super exciting. So you'd be able to talk to grandma at 16, you'd be able to talk to grandma at 26, you'd be able to talk to grandma at 36, and so on and so forth. Or yourself from back in the past. You could be able to talk to your 18-year-old self. You're going through something challenging, and you may need the optimism and enthusiasm that you may have had as a kid that now you feel a little bit more jaded for. But it's a very different sensory experience when you hear yourself in your own voice telling you this thing, or when you hear someone who's not around anymore in their own voice share this thing. Like I'm proud of you if you get an accomplishment that you were had been working a lifetime toward.
That's
uh,
really
so
cool.
yeah,
It sounds like
thank you, man.
hello again, and welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thanks for joining me for the podcast where personal stories can have a global impact. As you heard in the intro, our guest today is digital historian Cristian Cibils Bernardes. Cristian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Melvin. Excited to chat.
Yes, me too. So, how did a kid from Paraguay end up at Stanford University in California?
I'm still figuring that one out, but I can tell you, I grew up in a pretty unique context. So obviously Paraguay is very different from the US. It's funny. I grew up at times, and people would think like you grew up eating burritos or things like that. And I was like, oh no, man! I remember the first time I had a burrito, and it was like a foreign thing. Um, and like Paraguay to me is like the Shire from the Lord of the Rings. Like it's very similar energy. Not the tallest, hairy people who like to take care of the land and hang out and drink beer and just celebrate birthdays. Very communal, very agricultural. But in my context, my parents are both computer scientists, and they are both tech entrepreneurs. So they start a company together. My mom's the CEO, my dad's the CTO. This is a very rare thing. There's not really a tech scene in Paraguay. So, but I saw them do the entrepreneurship hustle, like try an idea for a few years and it wouldn't work out, or it would start to work out and then not work out. And most of my growing up till I was about 12 or 13 was just trying and trying and trying everything from, um, reselling Microsoft box software to writing a word processor for notary services. And the thing that started to work for them was when they caught on to the idea that SMS was going to be a thing. And so they started building out SMS, like the delivery infrastructure for the AT&Ts of Paraguay and then Latin America. But, it's not without a crazy story there. They would add all these value services on top of SMS. So, like you could do a sweepstakes on SMS, you could vote for American Idol, that kind of stuff. And one of the things that they did was these sweepstakes, and there was a mob, like a gambling mob, that was apparently this was eating into their pie, and so like we started getting death threats. My dad started looking at into leaving the country, and that's how they started expanding the business abroad. When they realized if we need to run somewhere, does our business work abroad? And that's what started, like basically once that happened, fortunately it all worked out. There was a DA that, took care of the whole thing. We started thinking a bit more global. And, like at some point I finished high school and I was like, well, what is something that just feels like an impossible dream? And so I applied to 20 schools and I somehow the stars aligned. MIT was the dream school, but I somehow ended up at Stanford and completely changed my life. I mean, like completely hard, 90-degree turn. Um, and yeah, and that's where the story begins to take shape.
So, what you're telling me is the mob drove your whole family to a new level of success.
Basically, it's something like that. Yeah, when you think it's bad, it may not be that bad after all.
Wow, that sounds like a trailer for a movie.
Right? Oh man. Yeah, it's about to get even crazier, Melvin, so don't even worry.
All right, so on a personal level, what's the biggest difference between what you experienced when you were in Paraguay and South America and what you experienced in California?
Just societally, like the US is a lot more individual, like individualistic. It really is about your professional accomplishments and not about your relationships. And in South America, it's still very relationship driven. You're this person's friend, this person's cousin, this person's here you're kind of by yourself. And basically you have your resume as your alibi for what you've been up to. And that was a new thing to adjust to. But also, I think like very empowering in a way, like there's like, it's on you to build your career. And I thought that was very exciting. Um, yeah, California has been incredibly welcoming to me. I mean, I really have to stress that I've struggled more when I had to come back to Paraguay for extended periods of time, and the reverse culture shock strikes me, more than actual culture shock coming here. No, it's like especially here where I'm at, well, in Silicon Valley, where there is this air of possibility. There's all these startups happening, and there's all these everybody's trying to change the world in some way or another. And it does feel like the American dream is very much alive here, or certainly has been or was at the beginning where I joined. And so that was electric. That was the kid from the Shire showing up and being like, oh my gosh, like. Um, uh, yeah, I think so. I think that's the social fabric is just so different. You hang out with a couple of really tight friends here, but in Paraguay you have like a much bigger crowd where the relationships maybe aren't as deep, but there's a herd. So like you're protected by the tribe and that kind of stuff.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No, no, no. That was basically it.
Okay, so as you mentioned, you grew up in an entrepreneurial family. Other than teaching you how to get away from the mob, what are some things that you learned about business from your parents that you never could have learned at Stanford?
Ooh, that's a good one. I mean, there's what I will forever be grateful to my parents is this resilience that they showed, constantly. Um, it would always be business talk at the dinner table. There would be some kind of problem being, HR related, marketing related, like, um, and so it was this constant theme of problem solving. Like there was always a problem. There's always like, like let's get brains to think about how to solve it. Through, very low lows and also quite high highs, and so that's the part like that experiential component is something that you don't learn in books. And honestly, even through my journey, that hasn't really turned entrepreneurial until very recently for me. Like it's not the same. You hear about these lessons and you hear about, what it means to be at the helm of the ship or, like the founder of something. And it's really quite different when, the responsibilities on your back and you have to motivate yourself to get excited about being up on a Monday morning because if you can't, then nobody else will. And so that by far, I mean, just the example of like, you fall, you stand up, you fall, you stand up, you fall, you stand up. And Stanford served a completely different purpose for me because I thought I was going to do computer science because I saw that's what my parents would do. I saw what effect it could have in society and the family. But I've always been really interested in the why, not just the how. And so I discovered this major there called symbolic systems, which is a blend of computer science with philosophy, psychology, and linguistics, which is my dream, in terms of it's, why are we doing what we're doing and what is the relationship between minds and machines? How does this thing that we build connect to the economy, to well-being, to social psychology, and like what is it good? How do we reason about things that are good or not? And so Stanford was more of like, okay, how do we fill up this intellectual bucket academically? Like socially, made a ton of lifelong friends and met the love of my life. I married to the person I met at Stanford. And so it became like this very different thing. Like business did not play into the Stanford experience till much, much later.
All right, you mentioned having majored in symbolic systems, and then you became the computer science section leader at Stanford.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
was that like for you?
Oh man, that's a throwback actually. I forgot about. Well, I needed to earn a disposable income at some point because I had an agreement with my parents. They were going to cover my personal expenses for the first year, and then if I had to have any expenses, I'd have to figure it out myself. And section leading is one of those jobs at Stanford that gives you a chance to teach, earnestly teach while being an undergrad. And I've always loved teaching. I've always loved education. I love learning. I love everything about it. And so It's also a competitive job. So it took three iterations. So I applied three times, got three interviews, got rejected three times, and the fourth time I got in. Uh, and it was incredible. I remember I got my first, I forget how much it was, but I got my paycheck. I had $23 in my bank account by the time the first paycheck came in. And I was like, well, but, I was really skimming, like it was really cutting it close. And it was an incredible experience. I mean, like just the putting yourself out there and like being in a position to connect with 20 or so students that you otherwise wouldn't have met. I think is just fantastic. And you also get to learn the material really well and how to communicate the material. And I've always liked making things that are difficult accessible. So this was great training for that. And then I took it even further. And after section leading, I became a lecturer, which is a more formal role where like we basically own a class, not just like a teaching assistant. And I loved that experience, like being the lecturer and having to prepare two 50-minute lectures per week. It's almost like a performance art, like you're showing up and you have to deliver. You can bomb or you can kill, and and certainly one of them is easier because of the subject matter, right? And so it was great, and I've always loved education, and in fact, when I when I finished undergrad and I started working as an engineer at Google, I Google was one of those other things like Stanford was like, oh my gosh, like a once in a lifetime opportunity. Like, how is this happening to me kind of thing. And so I joined this team that was in ads. And it was basically doing all kinds of engineering, like databases, back end, front end. And it was an amazing learning experience, but it's not what I was aligned with. Like, it's not what I was hoping to do. And so I did my best at that team. We launched a really big feature that fortunately I got promoted for. And then I switched to an AI education team, back to this idea of education. And this was 2019, 2018, 2019, something like that. So it was just before the pandemic. And it was an app that Google had acquired that was a Snapchat kind of interface, like a camera interface. And you took a picture of your homework and we would give you the resources to help you solve it. So like YouTube videos or step-by-step walkthroughs or explainer cards and things like that. And that was an amazing team. Like in terms of, it was early stage. It was a little bit more like a startup that was, everybody was doing a bit of everything. And it was served like this educational need, which I was super aligned with. So I always kept coming back to this through line of like, what is this thing that I'm meant to do? And I've just been doubling down on that.
Well, it sounds like all of the things that you had done up to this point sort of prepared you, developed you for creating Autograph. So
Yeah.
I want to talk about Autograph now. So did you hear about any family stories during your childhood that inspired you to begin this company?
Oh, for sure. Well, let me tell you how we connect from Google to here, because it kind of gets into that. So after Google, and the pandemic hits, and I'm like, okay, if it's the end of the world, I want to spend more time with the people I love. So I'm gonna move to Chicago to be with my now wife, who was doing med school there, and work remotely for my parents because I don't see them anymore. I don't know how travel is gonna work out, and so I'd love to be in closer touch with them. And that was another instance of big culture shock, going from 4 years at Google to the family business, and it's a very different everything. And but also filled with like these conversations around meaning and legacy and values, and how does our family connect over time if we're all going to be living in different places. And so super valuable. And I did that for 2 years. And then when my wife finished her med school and got her residency matched to San Francisco, we moved back to the Bay, and it had coincided that we got engaged. We moved here, and ChatGPT had just come out, and so I knew that there was something here for me to do. And at this point, 2 years in, my parents are the ultimate founders. They're the founders. So at some point, they would be like, you have to develop your founder instincts. You have to think like a founder. At some point, I realized I don't know that I can simulate these things. I feel like I need to have actual skin in the game and feel the pressure and tension of being a founder. And so I decided to take time off to figure out what I was going to do next. And total blank whiteboard, like I was like, okay, I could be a life coach. I could be an influencer. I could be an author. I could be all of these things. Where I was like, okay, very different life paths. And I didn't really find the thing that I was going to do, but there was this idea in my head when like a few days after my 30th birthday, I had this opening scene for a book show up in my mind. And I was like, these don't happen to me anymore. I can't remember last time that this happened to me. I want to follow this thread. And so that thread actually became this whole exploration around, wait a minute, like AI, like the AI landscape is actually really difficult to understand because there's all these companies that are building things that are getting killed by all these other companies. And so I didn't want to set out to build something in AI that was going to get killed really easily. And so what I realized was the only part of the AI landscape that isn't going to change is the data. We're always going to need more data. It's always going to need to be better data. And the data actually has an effect on AI. Like if it's good data, it updates the brain of the computer to be better. If it's bad data, it opens the brain of the computer to be worse. And so I thought, man, the thing I really need to be doing if I am committed to having the greatest impact is to write something that when consumed by AI, it updates its brain to point to a more utopian future than a dystopian future. And so then I turned this idea of this opening scene and this idea of the AI into a sci-fi novel. And that was the nerdiest excuse to write a sci-fi novel ever. And then it became just a project that just like I could put everything into it. I put all my philosophy into it. I put my life story into it. And it was just unbelievably rewarding. And I felt this sense of existential relief. My gosh, I exist somewhere else now. My story is written and I wrote it. And now I feel so empowered by this. I hope everyone on earth has a chance to feel this. But of course, in the back of my mind, I was like, I mean, I took 6 months to write a book that most people cannot do that, right? So then I had this thing in my mind. Well, how can we get people to think about their own story in a different way so that we all write a collective story that is better for everyone? And so I finished the book and I was like, okay, that's great. I probably should promote the book. And so I started my own podcast where I interview thought leaders, basically, Stanford professors, venture capitalists, AI researchers, psychologists, authors, artists to try and understand this idea of what our humanity looks like in the age of AI. What does it mean for jobs? What does it mean for our sense of self-worth? What does it mean for relationships? What does it mean for art and artistic expression? And this was a couple of years ago, so AI wasn't as in the picture as it is today. And even today, I don't think we're still having enough conversations around, my goodness, what does it mean when the legal profession is decimated because of jobs that machines can do. And I love the format. I love talking to people. I love finding out where they come from, what tickles them intellectually. And at some point I realized that the person I should be interviewing is my grandma, not necessarily for the podcast, but just to have her story down. She has a crazy life story. Her dad was an MI6 agent. They fled Europe during the war, somehow ended up in Paraguay. They would communicate over secret messages. It's just this crazy family mythology thing that's not documented anywhere. And very sadly, a couple days before our interview, she had a stroke. And that was the trigger that got me to connect all the dots. What is something that connects my desire to interview and get to know every human on earth? Because I really do believe that everybody's story is priceless and precious and has something to teach. With my knowledge of AI, with my desire to start my own thing that is defensible and unique and not necessarily something that other people are going to be interested in doing. Um, and that's what started getting me thinking about this idea of how do we record history today through an interview service, basically an AI powered interview service where you get a phone call once a week, almost like a journal asking about your life, how your life is doing. And the outcome of that, which is, I think, the most exciting thing is like, not only do we have the recording and the transcripts and the summaries, but also we can build so many things on top of that data that is incredible, including an autograph, like a digital version of you that sounds like you and speaks like you and has your memories. So that when your kids or when their kids are going through life and they're talking to Walter about their decisions that they're making that are weighing on them, like a job or a move or a relationship, Walter could say, hey, this reminds me of something your grandpa went through. Do you want to talk to him for 15 minutes? And you would be able to talk to your grandfather, even though your grandfather may not be able to talk to you anymore because they're sick, because they've passed, or who knows why. Or maybe, like scheduling is complicated, right? And so this idea of being able to understand the past by talking to it became incredibly exciting to me. And then the more diligence I did on, does this work? Do people lean into the idea? Do people shy away from it? It just became more and more motivating over time. Just, now we're very excited to have this out there and talking to people and hearing some stories that will just like melt your heart. So that's basically how the threads connect, and definitely and in no small part. I mean, like there's so many. I grew up in a giant family. Like I have my father has four siblings, my mom has three siblings. They each have at least a couple kids. Like a giant family with stories, and like I was fortunate enough to grow up in a context where we would see each other very frequently. So I know a lot of the extended family stories that have helped me out in life. But my kids are going to be in a different situation. My wife is from LA. We are going to live here. And so they're not going to be able to sit down with my extended family every weekend and get the cultural context. And so this idea of preserving stories as a tribute to the ones that came before and also as a gift to the ones that come after is just so moving to me.
That's really fascinating. Really fascinating. So, why did you decide to name this venture Autograph?
My favorite question. The name works in a bunch of layers. So on one side, we want this digital replica of you to be that you trust it enough that it can sign for you. This is the degree of confidence we need to aspire to. Also, autograph means shared presence, right? If you think about like an autograph as a collectible, it means that you were there with someone. And so this idea of presence is super important. Like you can, even though what's going on with you today may have a lesson that may take a decade to finally realize itself, that you can still, by sharing today's presence, you can actually talk to the future. And then there's a lot of fun graft stuff that we do, like in terms of you talk to Walter, you tell Walter about your bachelor party and you went to place A and then you went to place B and then you went to place C and you were with person A. And we actually extract those entities to like the places, the people, the stories, and we build like a little Wikipedia page for each. And so you have this encyclopedia of your life and they're all connected, like your friend Charlie was connected to your friend this other thing through this story that you did together. And so there's this graph that starts emerging. And the idea of autograph, it's also a self-creating graph, like it's this graph of human history and everything that we've done that is sort of building itself. And at some point it gets a little bit into the metaphysical as well, like this is just the story of humanity trying to tell itself. And it's just exciting to be a part of the company at this point. Yeah.
All right, so the name Walter. Why did you decide to name the AI voice Walter?
Yeah, that one was kind of a spur of the moment inspiration, roughly loosely on based on Walter Isaacson, the biographer. And so the idea, like every family deserves the Walter Isaacson treatment. Like, why do we just have the most famous and influential folks get their biography written? Something that, back in the day used to be only the kings would get portraits, right? Now everybody has a portrait in their selfie. And so the same idea is what we're going after. It's like everybody deserves the ultimate biography treatment.
Okay, that's interesting. That's really interesting. So, is this basically a time capsule and a recorded diary?
Basically, you're not too far off by thinking about that. The only difference is that you can talk to the time capsule so that you'd be able to have a conversation with grandma about her move to New Jersey, but then you'd also be able to ask grandpa about the same, and you'd be able to ask the kids about the same. So you'd actually start to get a more informed picture of the stories that make up who we are. Like and it's so interesting to me. Like part of what I learned in writing my book was, wait a minute, like history is this very precarious game of telephone that has been going on for hundreds of thousands of years. That we remix the same stories over and over, but there's some loss, and people augment their stories in a little way or embellish their stories in a little way. And there's the power dynamic of the ones that win the wars, writing the history and that kind of stuff. So then I was thinking, what is an alternative way to record history, and what is something that we can do now that's a lot more democratic and inclusive, and um, um, where it also doesn't require people to do anything different, because if you have to build a new habit, that's also very difficult. And so this idea of you just talk about your life, and Walter will sort of like checkpoint it and sort of like tell your story back to you. And then you sort of digest that and you're like, oh, is it like that? Is it, no, I would say I would use this word or not this other word. And just by doing that exercise, it's actually pretty therapeutic in a way where you have to get your story straight too, you know? And by doing that, you know, not only I think that that informs your present day decisions better, you're going to be a little bit maybe more mindful of the version of you that you want to be remembered as. But also the side effect is that now, you know, this version of you as you're living today can be, you know, captured. And also your evolution over time, you know, like you evolve 5 years later, you're a different person. You've accumulated views, stuff has happened to you, your plans have all changed. And so to be have the difference is also super exciting. So you'd be able to talk to grandma at 16, you'd be able to talk to grandma at 26, you'd be able to talk to grandma at 36, and so on and so forth. Or yourself from back in the past. You could be able to talk to your 18-year-old self. You know, you're going through something challenging, and you may need the optimism and enthusiasm that you may have had as a kid that now you feel a little bit more jaded for. But it's a very different sensory experience when you hear yourself in your own voice telling you this thing, or when you hear someone who's not around anymore in their own voice share this thing, you know, like I'm proud of you if you get an accomplishment that you were you know, had been working a lifetime toward. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really
So
cool.
yeah,
It sounds like
thank you, man.
sort of a high tech journaling from that perspective.
Yes, that's basically what we're going for. I mean, like it's a talking journal where we prompt you.
You talk about the telephone game with family stories. I've run into that over the years. I've written two books about my family's history
Mm,
in Texas, and it took 30 years of research just to go back six generations because there just wasn't much of a paper trail, and because I'm a descendant of enslaved people in Texas, there was no paper trail.
yeah.
And so we had some family stories that I used to start my search. And there was one relative in particular who I thought was my oldest known Texas relative that my mom had told me about. And then my mom died when I was 25, so I never got a chance to follow up with her later on. And
Mm,
when I started trying to find this person, I just couldn't find any record of her. And it took me years to realize that the person that my mom had told me about was actually two people. She had conflated
mm.
the names of two different people. And then once I
Like a first name one person, last name
right,
another person.
right. And once I
How'd you find that out? That's crazy.
it took forever. It took a while. It took me some time to admit that that's what happened.
Mm,
So I was thinking, all right, this doesn't seem right. This isn't the right name. This isn't the same name. And then I had to realize and come to that conclusion. It was almost like the death of a family member when I realized that this
right.
person didn't really exist, but it was two different people. And so that gave me two different paths to follow in order to collect the information I was looking for.
And you know, one thing, Melvin, is that, you know, every family has a version of you that is like the curious one out there trying to understand where the family comes from. And usually it's very much a volunteer effort, you know, like it's very much like a passion driven thing. It's so much work in terms of the, you know, the documentation that you need to collect and just like the world building that you need to sort of piece together. And then editorializing it and putting it into a book, that's two books. That's gigantic effort. And I think it's similar to what I felt in my book, where it's like, this is something that is so rewarding and enriching, and you know, like it does connect you to something deeper about yourself that you won't know until you do something like this. That I feel really sad. This is like, you know, essentially blocked by this mountain of work. And so, what is a way going forward to minimize that kind of work, but still create that same kind of connection experience? So I love that you did you're also one of the documentarians. It's a special passion.
Absolutely. And the way I had to do it is much more old school than the way that's available today. I would have to go
Yeah.
to a library or to a
Yeah.
courthouse and look for one document at a time, and then sort of mine that document for information and then go from there. And that's why it took over 30 years because the census is only out every 10 years. So I'd have to wait
Right.
for the next census to come out well, the census is taken in the US every 10 years, but it's only released every 72 years.
My.
So like the most recent document census that was released was from 1950, and that was released
No way.
in 2022, and the next one will be 1960, and that'll be in 2032. So if you don't find what you're looking for from the 1950 census and you have to wait until the 1960, you've got to wait another 10 years.
My gosh.
It's a
My
slow
God.
process. So yours sounds like it's much more accurate and much quicker to develop.
Yeah, 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 certainly. Part of our challenge is like we don't want to be a business that sells something that's going to have value in 70 years or even 10 years. Like we don't want to wait for someone to not be here for this to be valuable. So that's why we're also really focused on the conversational experience and it having like self-reflection component that you get value out of too. You know, like in the same way that you talk to a friend and you are updating a friend on your life and it feels good to share that because your friend has a special relationship where they kind of can call you out on your stuff a little bit too. I think we want to be in a similar position, but way more, let's say, like less opinionated than a friend. You know, like we don't want to tell people what to do at all. But we do want to share back to them what they shared. And if that feedback loop creates value, then I think that's where we want to be. And so the idea for us is that you talk to, you know, something happens and your first instinct is I should share this with Walter, like my raw impressions. And then you can actually capture the emotional journey of, you know, something happened, something really good or something really bad, and you know how you navigate these. Because I think that's the thing that was also on my mind when I took time off was, man, AI is here. There's no stopping the machine. It's going to be incredibly different. I mean, I already think about, you know, kids these days with the iPads and screens and TikTok and all that stuff. Like their upbringing was already so different to mine. You add AI into the mix, and who knows what, you know, what that's going to be or what the world is going to look like. And so this idea of preserving today, because we can understand today, we sort of know where we came from, even though it's not perfect. But in a world in which things change even faster, where products get deployed and hit millions of people in one day and change the way people behave and change the way relationships are formed and the date at which people get married and the age at which people have kids. And so the age at which it's just like the fabric of society is changing so much that I thought that it was important to have, okay, let's document today if we need to rebuild today, if something wrong, if we take a wrong turn at some point. Or if we take the right turn, then to remember where we came from. You know, like this was the right set of decisions that we took. And so I totally hear you on that. And it's very exciting for us. And there's this idea of, you know, like even though this is a project, a history project for the future, the idea is that it really has value for the present, you know, that this is the conversation that is worth having today.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned the opinions of friends in your daily life. Let's talk about your best friend Santiago Roca, who's your chief technology officer at Autograph. Is it
My
difficult?
rock star.
Is it difficult working with somebody you've been such close friends with for so long?
No, not at all. I mean, it's also one of those very special friendships where we're both so excited about what we're doing and what it means that we have very little ego between us. So there's no power dynamic necessarily in the sense that like like I want to do this way because I XYZ. We're really in this together, and so it feels like if anything, like it feels like co-parenting. You know, we have a kid together and have to navigate difficult decisions, and we split responsibilities in a way where we're both sort of happy with the responsibilities on one side and the execution on the other. So he's more than happy to take on all the technology, the building, the getting the product out there. And I'm excited to own the rest of the story. You know, how do we get the word out, the actual product, the pricing, the, you know, partnerships that we make, fundraising, all that stuff, which is the critical, or yeah, team management, project management, all that stuff. No, it's been incredible. I mean, like we have 30 years of context, so we know, you know, like when you know someone so well, you can guess what they're gonna say back. And so our meetings are like 5 minutes long because we only meet about the things that we're not exactly sure how they're gonna land. And so that, I mean, it's been incredibly rewarding to have like a thought partner that that we're so aligned in value. I mean, like we've been through everything together. Like literally, I think our first party we went to together, we went to watch these all Star Wars together. It's one of these, you know, like and our stories are, you know, it's a story of two friends that are taking on this like really epic. challenge to negotiate terms with death, basically, right? Like to some degree, like, we want to be around for each other, and we want to be around for each other's kids, and we want to support each other, and like we're building the tools that are going to allow our families to be with us for longer than has ever been possible. And so we're really motivated by the identity aspect of it too, which is very different than, many stories I hear about people, friends working together. Um, and yeah, I think we did a really good job figuring out why we're doing this. Why is it that we're doing this? Why is it that we're doing it together? And what are the motivating factors for us? Is how much of it is an impact versus how much of it is prestige versus how much of it is what else? What else do you get out of the founder's journey? Um, Doing the work of having that aligned at the beginning. I mean, I can't express how lucky I feel that we got that right. And for anybody starting a company and looking for a co-founder, for anybody starting a company, I would recommend having a co-founder because it's a very lonely job otherwise. But also there is it's very similar to marriage in a way. So you got to do the work and you got to do the exercises and you got to do the thing to prevent any kind of mishap down the road.
Well, it's easy to see how you're able to generate excitement about this project. How did you manage to use that kind of excitement leverage to acquire $2.5 million in seed funding?
Yeah. Well, what was interesting, Melvin? Like there's so many layers to this idea, right? There's like the family connection layer, there's like the technical challenge, there's the value of the data that we get. There's societal impact, there's like the new technology. There's so many facets to it. It's also a hard job in the sense that, like we get the phone call when it's bad news, right? Like, somebody gets sick that you don't want to be sick. They ask about what we do. And so there's a fortitude component too that I've sort of learned to develop as the idea has matured and as the thing has grown, and to sit with that emotional space. Like there's an emotional space that you have to sit with when it gets really difficult, because even when we're doing our best and adding the most value to the people we love the most, these are very powerful human emotions of embracing how short life is. And that was a process to learn how to catalyze that motivation into both how I presented myself in terms of fundraising and the written materials that we put out to raise money. What started out being more a cookie cutter, like traditional VC pitch. Here's the problem, here's the solution, here's how we're going to do it. Eventually took a completely different path and became a lot more emotional narrative story about here's the opportunity we see, here's the value that we see in it, here's how we're going to get after it, and this is our thesis and and all the language was in the materials that was like started with a quote with the book Life of Pi that says, "Life is so beautiful that death has fallen in love with it." And it just completely sets the tone completely different. And so what I've been learning to do is how to take the motivation that I feel, because I really can't imagine anything that I'm more excited about or aligned with, but also sitting with that emotional space of knowing that, yeah, I'm going to be the person that gets the phone call when someone you love gets diagnosed, when somebody's memory starts failing, when, and the knowledge of my own experience. I think back to my grandma's story, that there is a cliff. This is something that you can do now, and you don't know how long you'll be able to do. And if you wait too long, you may have missed the window. And these are the thing that happened with my grandma was life. Like people have strokes, people get hurt, people get sick. The difference was that I had written out the questions that I now know I'm never going to find the answers out to. And then I was like, this is the solved problem. This is the solved problem. We don't even need, this is figured out. And so learning to sit with that space is been a marvelous challenge. But on the other side, if the love that parents had for their kids has been enough to get us where we are now, then that is the same. Why tap into a different energy source? That is the energy source we need to build this thing that's going to be the greatest gift to the next generation I can imagine.
So, what would it take for you to consider this venture to be a successful one?
It's really interesting. I mean, like I already think it's successful in the sense that I am capturing the stories of my parents, my in-laws, my grandparents. Like there's an existent. I can't express to you how existentially relieved I feel that my kids are gonna get to talk to their grandparents, no matter what happens. I don't even have kids yet, so in terms of that, I mean, there's another aspect of me that is like, there are stories every day that we're losing, and I have the solution. And so, like, I would think it would be successful when people hear about a difficult situation, that somebody in their network says, you should try autograph. You should tell Walter. Like having that, like sitting there in society where we're the trusted repository of data, especially for difficult moments, but in the good times too, for sure. When you get a promotion, when you when at a college graduation, these are the moments that we want to remember. I think that, like, culturally, that's like, I want to share with Walter, or somebody be like, yeah, you should talk to Walter. You should definitely tell Walter about that. That is the success milestone. I think what it means in terms of users is probably millions of users. That'd be great. Like, I think we have 7 billion stories that were being very difficultly edited every single day and authored every single day. Uh, why not? I mean, like, why not record all of them? Why would one be less important than any of the others? I do not buy that.
Okay. That's very, I can't even think of the word, a big perspective, a worldwide perspective. So everybody's got a story to tell, and most people have several stories.
Oh
It's
yeah.
difficult to record all of those. So could you imagine, with technology changing the way it is, that this becomes more rounded, more visual? Like, let's say a hologram with a person telling the
Yeah.
story.
I think so too. I think so for sure. I mean, you see the advances in AI, and it's crazy. It's impossible to keep up. And so our thesis is that the video models are going to get so good, and you're going to be able to sort of animate characters through photos, or you give it a couple of videos of somebody, and they'll be able to reanimate them. For us, I think the challenge is, what does that animation look like, or what does that person say? And it's much easier to get audio data than it is video data. Audio data you could do through over a phone call. It's much easier. Video you need to set up. Like, you need a webcam. You need to plan your. You need to put it on the calendar. It's a lot more logistics. And so, what I think is probably going to happen is these conversational journals that probably at some point in the future, when phones aren't a thing anymore, are going to be all like brain related. And then whatever other multimodal experiences, video, photo, they're going to be used to build these snippets or representations out of the data that you give autograph, like a biopic kind of story of a grandpa working in the factory kind of thing, and basically, like, you'd have to invent or like recreate the aspects of that experience and editorialize it so it's short, so that you can consume it in a short period of time. And so I think that's where it's going. It's going to be like these little short form shareable pieces that are mostly AI generated, but that include the likeness of the person. And in time, I mean, there's no reason for it to stop anywhere, right? So in time, there will be robots, and you might as well find yourself talking to someone who isn't here anymore, embodied in a robot. So, and the future's about to get real weird, real weird. So I'm like, let's remember where we come from.
The future could be as weird as the present is right now.
Oh my gosh, yeah, yeah.
So as I wind down my conversations with guests, I always ask them this final question. So, do you have any advice on any subject that you'd like to leave with the listeners today?
Yeah, don't take advice. I have this philosophy, it's maybe silly, but that it's better to model behavior than to listen to advice. Advice is very piecemeal. It's very targeted, it's very specific. It's hard to contextualize into your life. But behavior is much easier to copy. Like, oh, and it's much easier to know if you want to copy. Like, you may have a person who does really well in one area of life, and they'll give advice about money, or they'll give advice about fitness, but you maybe don't want the money advice from the fitness person. You don't want the health advice from the money person. And so modeling behavior actually forces you to think about, who do I want to be like? that has the proportions of life that I want, the right amount of money, or the right amount of friends, or like, oh, the really successful person, but he has no friends. I think everybody should be a bit less compromising in their vision for their lives, and find the people that they want to emulate more so than the people they want to follow. So that's my contrarian piece of advice. Of course, if you don't follow my advice, you are following my advice. So that one's an interesting one.
You got him either way.
Uh,
All right, it's been a great way to kind of wind down the conversation. It's been a great conversation. So our guest today has been Cristian Cibils Bernardes. Cristian, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Melvin. This has been great. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. So please go to my website at podcastreallife.com for more information about my guest and the things we discussed today. That's it for today's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another chance to learn from each other. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.